Hi, I'm Lisa Attygalle, Director of Engagement at Tamarack Institute. And joining me today is co-founder and CEO of Bang the Table, Matt Crozier. Matt is joining us today from Boulder, Colorado. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So after more than a decade working in the government sector in the UK and Australia, Matt co-founded Bang the Table 9 years ago with partners Crispin Butteris and Karthik Reddy. Matt, tell us about what led you and your co-founders to create Bang the Table.
Yeah, sure, Lisa. So Crispin and I met, gosh, about 14 years ago now, working in the government in Australia. We were both long-time public servants, and both had a variety of jobs across the government that were all community-facing. You know, basically, jobs involved going out there, working out policy positions. I worked in economic development and infrastructure and environmental issues. And always we needed to go to the community, not just to get validation of what we were suggesting, but also to get their ideas and their input. Often we worked in communities that, that we didn't have deep knowledge of, but the communities did. And so community engagement was a huge part of what we both did. Crispin actually did his PhD in it. And we both were running into the same problem, which was that, my last job in government was running a planning office, and I'd run public meetings to try and connect with and talk with the community, and the same five people turned up every single time. Broadly speaking, two environmentalists who thought that we were suggesting too much development, two developers who thought we weren't asking for enough development, and a strange guy from the Fisherman's Co-op, and I could never quite work out what he wanted. But we were clearly not connecting with the broad community. And when you do connect with the broad community, they have reasonable ideas. They are much more flexible in their approach. They're willing to listen. They're willing to understand the problems. And it's a much more valuable experience. So we were left in our traditional mode with trying to speak to our minister, as it was in Australia, and convince the minister that actually, these submissions we've received raise these issues, but they're not actually representative of what the community are thinking. And of course, all the people who turn up and give feedback claim to represent the community. So it's a very difficult situation. And one day, Crispin dropped a business plan on my desk and said, "Hey, how about we try and take this online?" And that was how we got started, really. And in the last 10 years since we started Bang the Table, we've been through a few pivots. We started just doing discussion forums. Now we have 8 engagement tools. We've really built up the reporting, the participant management, and all the sort of practice around it. And we've learned a lot of lessons from our clients. We work with 280 organizations around the world at the moment. We're currently launching over 100 engagement projects with our clients most weeks. It was 144 2 weeks ago, which was the highest I've seen. So we're learning all the time, and we're sort of building up an enormous store of best practice that we're kind of excited to be able to share with people.
Mm-hmm. And you've already mentioned two common challenges that people have, the challenge of the same five people, and then the other challenge of the silent majority as well. Tell us more about the silent majority and why people should engage online at all to tackle that challenge.
Oh, sure. Well, look, picking up, the silent majority, we all know they're out there because we're only talking to a very thin slice of the community. And the silent majority will often, not have a preset position, which means they will listen, they will learn, they'll take into account the differing arguments, and they'll form a view, which is a really valuable process. Whereas often the people who you're talking to have a preset agenda, and they come to you not really willing to listen, they come to push an agenda. And it's very difficult to work with them to find better solutions. And in terms of the way you put that question, why you should engage online at all, I do think it's a really important point to make, and I'm very glad you've raised it early on. There is evidence that communities feel happier with the organizations they work with, particularly in government, but that applies elsewhere, when they feel engaged by them. And nearly all communities do not feel engaged by the sort of, the face-to-face outreach that takes place. And you can see that by the numbers that are there. The other reasons you need to be engaging online are about risk. A lot of organizations, and this has changed over the last 10 years, and it's getting easier to explain the rationale for engaging online to organizations now. But a lot of organizations kind of are a bit scared of the online space. Social media is often an echo chamber, and there's a lot of, misinformation out there and things like that. And people sometimes feel that if they don't engage, they're safe because they're not in the space. It's a sort of head in the sand mentality of, if it's not in the media clippings on my desk, or it's, then we'll ignore it. But actually, your community are out there. They are talking about you, and they're talking about a bunch of other things too. And if you're not in the online space and you vacate it for them, the problem that occurs is, the people who've already made their minds up, you probably don't have to worry too much. They may go to some corner of the internet and talk to each other in their own echo chamber, and that's kind of fine. But if somebody comes along who hasn't made their mind up yet, and the only place they can find to engage on an issue is the people who are, have already made their minds up, who are maybe protesting what you're doing, they're going to get captured by that section. And I've seen this happen over the years on many, many issues, where a few vocal people can capture a whole community because, the real facts aren't out there. And any organization that feels that, anyone that's sitting out there saying, oh, but we have a website, we put the facts on the website in our FAQs or in our news. The truth is that the community these days, they don't go and browse static websites to find information. People want to get out there and ask somebody. So they're far more likely to go somewhere where they can ask and be responded to in a I guess, a tailored way for their question, than they are to go and cruise through your static website digging for the information. So it's really important to be in the space, so that you're not vacating it for I suppose, groups who maybe have different interests at heart. And I'm seeing this particularly now. I've moved to the US a year ago, and it's been fascinating watching what's going on in the US in politics and around the place. And it's a society that's very divided. And I know that, there's a very similar thing occurring in Australia as well. Politics has become quite divided. And part of this is people are getting their news from unreliable sources. You go and people are learning stuff from Facebook, and there's evidence that they're reading and absorbing and believing articles that suit their opinion set. So we're creating this big echo chamber, and if organizations aren't engaging themselves so they can set this straight, so they can talk to people, so they can provide the right information and hear about what's being said, then I'm afraid you're missing an opportunity, and you're going down a dangerous path towards having a very divided community.
Mm-hmm. And so as people, if they say, yes, I know I need to engage the community, and I want to do that actively, and I know that we need to do that online as well. They say, yes, we need to open up the conversation. But I often hear fears, and that's where this whole topic came about, was how do you actually open up that conversation, empower your community to have really transparent conversations, but still feel like you can have some sense of control? So how do you, draw the lines around the sandbox that you're having great conversations within? And so you've outlined 5 key areas for us to think about. So it's tool selection, setting the context, facilitation, moderation, and interpreting the results. So let's tackle each of these, and I know you have some examples to share about each, and I'm going to bring the voice of the community engagement practitioner into this conversation too, and really voice some of those fears. And I encourage everybody on this session to ask any questions or name any fears that you would have in the question box as well. So tool selection. Tell us about that and how that will help people to engage authentically, but really remain in control at the same time.
Sure, and I think it's one of the most important areas. I might start by, excuse me, I might start by saying that the early days of online engagement have been characterized by some pretty poor practices. And I did see a study recently, I can't remember the exact numbers in it, but it was indicating that Canadians weren't very confident of online engagement as a way to be engaged. And I think that's because the typical practice over the last 10 years for online engagement has been, oh, we should do something online, let's put up a quick survey monkey. Or, let's just throw up a form for submissions or something like that. It's been very tokenistic, and it's been driven by using and characterized by using single tools, maybe a message board for all stages of an engagement. But anybody who's an engagement practitioner out there knows that when you're planning and delivering a face-to-face engagement event, it's quite a nuanced process. You look at the issue, you look at a whole range of factors before you design your process. And I think it's really important to be able to do this with online tools as well. So I want to just take you through a few things, but the first thing I want to say is that it's really valuable to be working with a platform for engagement rather than just, you know, plugging in and using a different tool for every project. And one of the reasons for that is that one of the major benefits of online engagement is building community cohesion. You know, I spoke before about how communities are becoming quite divided, and if you've got a platform approach to engagement, and I'm just going to slide across to a website, I hope you can see this. This is Let's Talk Niagara Falls. This was launched earlier this year. And you can see they're engaging the community on a whole range of projects, including asking for shout-outs for good staff behavior. You know, there's some stuff about loving the neighborhood. There's some things about off-leash dog walking, which is always sure to get some feedback, and they're even promoting a live radio show in the area. Now, the point here is these guys are engaging on multiple projects on one platform. And so when people come to their site and sign in to participate, they can collect those people and then reach out to them again. They can close the loop of the engagement, which is always a useful thing to be able to do, to thank people for their input and feedback to them what you did with that input, and then bring them back to talk to you about something else. And you can gradually build up a large database, or statistically representative database of your community that allows you to much more easily reach out to them and bring them back to talk to you. And you know, we tell our clients that if you take this sort of approach, that one of the KPIs, one of the key performance indicators you should be seeing within a year or so of starting is more people turning up to your face-to-face meetings. And I've had clients report to me that they're not only seeing more people, but they're seeing more diverse people coming to those meetings. The online space gets more people in the room and allows you to reach out and bring them back. You know, and it gets them interested, gets the conversation starting, and then your face-to-face events, which can also be promoted online, allow you really to dig deep with a much wider audience. So I think right away you should be thinking about a platform. There are a number of them out there, not just ours, but if you take a platform approach and you build between engagements, then you can really start building momentum and getting the community feeling that they're being engaged in a consistent way. And I think these guys at Niagara Falls have done a wonderful job in getting started with this. Next, tools. I did promise to talk about tools, so I've started this with our engagement tools spectrum, and we've written this spectrum so that it goes from a controlled environment on the left of your screen to an open environment on your right. So we've kind of broadly put them in terms of risk, although you know that's not always the best way to look at it. So these are the tools that we have within our Engagement HQ platform, and they're broadly representative of the online tools that are out there. There are some other things out there. We don't have wikis, for instance, so you know it's not comprehensive. And if anyone wants to, you know, flag any other things, I'm more than happy to talk about where they might fit in this spectrum. Now, the point I want to make about tool selection is that if you've got a project, you'll want to think about how risky it feels, what stage of the project you're at, and you'll want to use a tool that's appropriate. You know, I've seen people using crowdsourcing ideas tools to ask people what they think of a draft strategy, and frankly, that's a really bizarre thing to do. You know, you want at that point the community's response to your ideas. You don't want their new ideas, and that's liable to lead to community frustration. You know, if they want to share it, if you're inviting their ideas on a draft, you're probably beyond the point of wanting to take on new ideas. But the community, you're inviting the community to fire ideas at you. So these tools can be looked at in a few ways. So I might just start with the controlled environment. So we have surveys and polls. I don't think they need much explanation or illustration. They're very closed, they're very controlled, they're very safe. People can only answer the questions that you ask, and they see very little of the feedback unless you choose to share your reports with them. Now, surveys and polls are actually very useful tools. Surveys are particularly useful when you're at that point of the process where you want to either validate your results in a quantitative way, or you are showing the community a draft perhaps, or you're showing them a position, and you're wanting to get feedback on that position. They can be really valuable. Polls at all times can provide you a really quick and almost fun to participate in snapshot of what's going on, so they're also useful. Then I'm going to get into the mixed environment, and I'll show you a few of these. So the mixed environment is where you have some control over the content appearing, but it feels quite engaging for the community. You know, the controlled environment, the surveys and polls, it ain't much fun for the community participating in those. You know, really they're doing something for you. They're not really participating in something. They're not interacting with other people. In the mixed environment, there's a bit more interaction, and I'll show you a couple of these. So we've got our question and answer tool in here, and I think I've got one open on the page. And in fact, this is a good example of a fairly controlled environment. This is the city of Vernon, and they're running a process about their budget for the year. And they've got a few things running. They've got a link here to our budget allocator, which is a budget allocation tool, which they're using. Again, that's a fairly closed environment. It's fairly, you know, it doesn't expose results to everybody. People simply allocate their budget. We've got a news feed running, and they're asking the community to ask a question. And I can't say enough how important this very simple tool is. So people just ask a question. You can reply to the question. You know, when a question comes in, you get an email alert. You can reply to it either privately or publish it on the website. And if I go quickly to another site, this is the master plan for Vancouver Airport. These guys have been running a question and answer tool throughout the 4 years of their master plan project. And you can see here they've built a really transparent record of responding to people's questions. And I think this is a really important tool, not just in terms of, you know, where it sits on our risk spectrum, a mixed environment. People feel it's interactive, but you control what appears on the site. But it's also really important because you can turn on one of these tools at the beginning of a long-term project. And you can use this as a way to manage the risk of people going and talking to people elsewhere. So if you're starting, for instance, a major infrastructure project like Vancouver Airport, you know you're going to go through a number of consultative phases. Those might last a month or two each, and you might be at the time out asking people for their ideas and their stories and discussing policies in a forum or something like that. But in between those, if people come to your site, traditionally there's nothing there, there's just information. And so what we've been working on with our clients is opening these question and answer tools at the start of a project process and leaving them open throughout. If we flip back to Vancouver Airport, who've been through 4 phases of consultation, you'll see here that they're only getting a question or two every month. You know, it's not high maintenance for them to be responding, but these presumably are people who want to know about what's going on. And if this wasn't here, they'd be going off to social media. And who knows, you know, what groups are out there on social media with an agenda about the expansion of an airport. And whether people would be getting the real facts from those social media places is questionable. So it's in our interest to always have something open during the life of a project. And questions could be really useful in that. I'll skip over the guest book. The guest book is kind of dull. It's just a guest book. And I want to talk about stories. Again, it's mixed environment. And the reason it's a mixed environment on our site, even though storytelling is incredibly engaging, the reason it's a mixed environment is because you pre-vet the stories before they appear. A story doesn't have to flow. It doesn't have to appear immediately on a screen. People can get a message saying, we're going to review your story and we may share it. But it creates a really strong and very engaging space. You don't tend to get thousands of stories told. The most we've ever had was 297, which was a project we did for the Australian government, talking to disabled people and their carers about what they live with, which was actually quite remarkable. You know, stories have a way of getting behind the argument and helping you to actually understand the issue. And so I'll just show you this quickly. This is the city of Oshawa. This is a bit more light-hearted than the example I've just given. They've simply, since day one with the Connect Oshawa site, which has won a few awards recently, which has been wonderful, they've been asking people to share their stories about Oshawa. And people are able to put in a story, and you can see here that there's a whole bunch of stories. People can use this to share rich media and things like that. And so you create this really sort of engaging feeling and very personal space where people can tell their stories. And these have been used quite a lot in planning projects, you know, asking people about a place before you change it, quite a lot for organizations involved in care and support to understand their clients' need more deeply. Storytelling can be wonderful, but in a risk perspective, it's not very risky. And in fact, it ameliorates the risk of people feeling that things are tokenistic. because when you're asking people for their stories, it really feels like you're listening. It really feels like you're interested in their view. And you know, we've seen a lot of projects where we have quite contentious issues. We did one recently in Australia about culling wild horses in national parks that was very, as you can imagine, a very fraught issue. And they started with storytelling, getting people telling their stories about the park and about the wild horses and things like that. And what we found is it set the scene for an engagement that became very civil and very constructive. Because once you understand somebody's story and you understand them a little bit, you're far more likely to be respectful of them.
And Margaret Wheatley says you can't fear somebody's story that you know. You can't fear somebody whose story you know. One question for you here, because
Sure.
this story, I kind of have one of those fear moments from the practitioner's perspective of by inviting stories. What happens if you have a whole lot of people sharing about how what you're trying to do will negatively impact them? How can you kind of manage that well?
Look, I think it's all about, and we'll get to context setting in a minute, but you know, the point of having 8 tools isn't that you deploy them all every time. It's that you think about your project and think what's going to be most appropriate. So
Yeah.
if you're talking about something and you're worried the community is going to come back to you with a strong backlash, if you feel that their stories are all going to be about how terrible your service is, you probably don't invite stories at that point. You probably go to the more closed environment, you provide people news, information, you invite them to ask you questions that you answer, and you might put a survey up to draw feedback. So you really, it's about, you know, having the full spectrum of tools available to you to deploy either different stages of a project or, you know, just from day one of the project, actually allows you to choose how you're going to manage that risk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, it does.
Cool. Okay. So look, I might just quickly go to the open environment because this is, I mean, this is sort of where my passion lies. It's much more engaging stuff. It's going to the community often at the early stages of a project or process and asking them for their ideas, asking them to illustrate their thoughts, or asking them to debate. And discussion forums are very important. And you know, as I said earlier, we launched with just discussion forums. Exposing people to the views of others is really important in this day and age. And actually, inviting your community to debate and give feedback through discussion forums can be a really valuable thing to do. But it does feel a bit risky because it does invite people to come and leave multiple comments and to argue a point. And I just want to show you, just illustrate a few of these open environment tools. So this is one that launched last week, actually, Deville de Gatineau, if I've said that properly. My French accent's never good. Now, this is about cycling in Gatineau, and it was launched only a week ago, and it's had 1,200 comments in a week. Now, these are pins on a map, and each pin comes with a comment attached. And it's actually a very, even though it's open, it's a very safe environment because it's extremely difficult to troll a map. You can put your pin in with your comment, but it's very difficult to drive an agenda through one of these. And these are super engaging. Loads of people get involved, as you can see here, and they tend to provide you a really great base layer of data for any spatial issue. Now, if your issue is not spatial, the non-spatial alternative is an ideas board. I don't think I need to illustrate this too much. This is the city of Penticton, who started their Parks and Rec master plan process with asking people for ideas about how to do parks and recreation better. Nice, simple question. People responded very positively. And you know, this is another element of risk management, is always posing the positive question. You know, if you've got a problem or an issue and you're looking to manage the problem or issue, asking people for their ideas for solutions is sure to get a much better response than asking people about the problem. So, you know, that's another thing to keep in mind. Anyway, I should move off the tools, but I hope you can get what I'm trying to get across is that just one tool isn't going to cut it for you. You need multiple tools that are available for different projects so you can design your process and hopefully design your online process so that it complements your face-to-face engagement process. Lisa, did you want to pose another question or shall I just carry on?
Sorry, I was on mute. Before you move on, we just have a comment from Julie Philippek, who says, I appreciate learning about these online tools. However, she believes there's no better way to garner meaningful community engagement than to build in-person, face-to-face relationships between decision makers and the people that their decisions will impact. The scale I work at is a neighborhood scale, which is particularly conducive to that. But I think that principle, that actual relationship, building that relationship is the key to trust and can't be ignored, even when you're talking about the large scale issues and projects. So how do you, I know that one reason that you love those in open environments so much is that relationships can be built between people, as opposed to in the closed environments, there's no interaction between people. Anything else to add about Julie's comment?
Yeah, only that I completely agree with Julie. You know, I didn't get into online engagement to stop people from engaging face to face. I think I mentioned earlier that one of your key objectives in doing this should be to feed the face to face process, to get people involved, to make them feel they've got a contribution to make and to draw them in. Because when you get people in a room, you know, I can't see the body language of the audience now. As far as I know, they've all nipped around to the local Starbucks or Tim Hortons probably for a coffee. But, you know, when you've got people in a room, you can interact more, you can focus on the points they're interested in, you can dive deeper. It's always better to engage people face to face. But the sad truth is it's very hard to get people in that room. And what online engagement done well does is it helps you to bring more people into the room. So you get valuable feedback either side of your face-to-face events, you know, before, after, and also you've got that chance to grab people and show them why it's worthwhile being engaged. So it's a piece of, you know, it's a tool in your engagement toolbox. It's not everything by any means.
Mm-hmm. All right, tell us about setting the context.
Sure. Look, I think this is really important in managing risk, and I don't need to show examples to illustrate this. There's a lot of confusion seems to go on between democracy and engagement. So there's this natural tendency, if you put out an issue, say you put out a discussion forum about, you know, should we remove the railway line, which seems like an odd example, but it was one of the first big ones we ever did. And people want to talk about that, then there's this natural tendency for the people in a discussion space or on an ideas board to want to win the issue. Because we come from an environment where democracy implies that if more people think something, then they should get their way. But in my mind, online engagement should never be about that, because not everybody is online. And it's really important to acknowledge that, you know, although people love to make generalizations about who's online and who's not, and most of the generalizations are completely wrong. The truth is some people will choose not to be engaged in the online space and others will. And if you try to use this for voting, for weighing votes and decision making, that's a dangerous business. The opportunity to use online tools for engagement is about making sure that you get the full range of ideas, that you understand some of the nuances, some of the things the community are saying, looking for whether you've missed some of the key issues in your planning. And we've seen many clients over the years who've put out projects thinking that, you know, one thing was the issue, only to find the issue was something completely different. And, you know, those are the value in engagement. And so when you set the context, you can actually reduce a lot of the risks. You know, if you say, and in fact our moderation rules on our sites do say, that one comment that says something different may be just as valuable as 50 comments that say one other thing. You know, if you explain to people that this isn't about making the decision here, if you're one of the people on the call who works in city government, for instance, you know, telling the community that the online engagement results will go alongside the face-to-face engagement results and alongside the opinions of the accountants and the engineers and the planners and the lawyers. And all of this information will go to the elected councillors to help them make better decisions. That context allows people to see that they don't have to worry about winning. And when you get people not worrying about winning, you get much more constructive conversation taking place, much better dialogue, and much less incentive to try and troll or ambush a discussion. And so I think setting that context is really critical. Most of our clients do this very well. And most of our clients over time, as they do more engagement, get a much deeper understanding that it's that they're doing, and their communities seem to relax as well. So we have had cases where people have tried to kind of ambush the space. But yeah, what people are doing is failing to really understand the point of engagement as opposed to democracy.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to add about setting the context?
Not
Should
really.
we move straight to facilitation? The one thing I'd add is that I find um, that we need to over communicate that context that we're in, and specifically let people know what's on and off the table.
Yep.
Because if something's actually, if we're further down in the process, if we've already got a draft and we're looking for comments as opposed to coming up with ideas, we need to say that, and we need to really let people know what context that we're inviting conversation around, and I think over communicate rather than under communicate
Yeah.
would be my recommendation for that one.
I'm glad you raised that, Lisa. Yeah, really good point. And nothing's worse than misleading people about what you're trying to do, pretending to engage when actually you've made your mind up. The community typically are very forgiving of people who've made a decision and are showing leadership. And you can engage when you're informing people. I showed you the question and answer tool earlier. You can provide people with news. You can, use polls to take their temperature and things like that. So just because you're informing them doesn't mean engagement shouldn't take place. And yeah, look, what you've said is absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move to facilitation.
Wonderful. Okay. So we've worked with three broad levels of facilitation in the online space, and most of these apply to discussion forums. Now, before I get to that, I should say, I mentioned earlier that what we try to do is create an environment where you can give feedback to participants, usually through email, to let them know what you're doing about a project, to let them know what you've done with the results. And of course, this can also be used for a form of facilitation. So if you're asking people for ideas, you may not be replying on site, but you might choose to strike up a sidebar conversation with them over email to ask them more about it and to draw out their ideas. So facilitation can take place in a mix of on and offline. But broadly speaking, when we've seen facilitation in the online space, it's related to online discussion. And there are three broad levels that our clients work at. The first is that they're just not there at all, which might sound really strange, but a large number of our clients choose to effectively cede the online discussion to the community. They'll say, we want to see a discussion between you guys here. We'd love to see all your ideas, see the debate. We'll be listening, but we're not going to be in the space. Now, that has merits if you are resource constrained, and the community seem to respond pretty well to that. But, like all things, the more you put in, the more you get out. The next level is sort of what I call fairly low resource facilitation. And this is quite common in what we've seen with our online engagement. And this is where the project manager is coming in maybe once or twice a week and is responding to a number of the comments that are being made. Usually this should take the form of asking supplementary questions, because then people feel listened to, they feel valued, and it draws them into the conversation, and you can use this to direct the conversation in the way you want to go. Sometimes it might be in responding to them, but a word of caution here, facilitation should never be letting the engineers in your organization have a login so that they can go and argue with people. People love to argue the technical details. A citizen engagement space is not the place for that, and I have seen that on a number of occasions, usually I probably picked on engineers unfairly. I could pick on some other working groups as well, but generally speaking, people who are expert in what they do like to take umbrage with a comment from the community and enter into an argument with them. And that's never an effective way to engage. So, use the question and answers approach to answer people's questions when you're facilitating. Ask them supplementary questions, answer, points of clear fact, but if they then come and argue with you more, just don't enter it, because there are people out there in the community who want to try and drag you into an argument and trip you up along the way. I don't want to make it sound too vicious out there, but sometimes these things happen. And the final way of facilitation, which we don't see much of, but works very well, is really hands-on online facilitation. Now, it's a difficult art, because in the online space you've got no body language to work by, and any of you who've worked as facilitators know that, you know, being able to see the body language in the room is one of the key tools that you have available to you. So online in facilitation, you need to be very careful. You need to be aware that what looks like a funky joke in your response might look quite offensive to the person who's getting it. And so you need to be quite gentle. But we have seen a few instances where people have been in the space, you know, during defined hours and have been responding to everybody and drawing more people in, and you get a really engaging conversation going on. The other thing that we've seen our clients use to achieve the same thing is community facilitators. So the first time we did this, I think, was a public art project in Victoria, Victoria in Australia, that is, and they asked 5 or 6 very prominent local artists to come and facilitate the discussion about what public art should look like in the area. And that was super engaging. It was wonderful because you actually had the community facilitating the community. Which kind of takes me to my final point of facilitation, which is the trolls. So everybody, one of the fears everybody has about going online is, oh, you know, we know these people and they phone us every week and they just give us a hard time and they'll be in there and we'll get trolled by them. And I think it's a legitimate aim to try and turn your trolls into community facilitators. Now, there are some trolls, we've come across a few over the years, who are just beyond the pale and need to be blocked out and, you know, just pushed aside. But most of those people that we often deride as being the usual suspects, the squeaky wheels, the noisy voices in the community, they're there because they're passionate about the community and they're very proud of the community. And if you can influence their behavior in the space through moderation, which we'll talk about in a bit, if you can influence their behavior in the space so they understand the rules, often they become really passionate advocates and they actually become facilitators. Now, their views might be controversial, but nothing gets a community talking more than a good debate. And so, you know, I would implore you not to dismiss those people who are so passionate about your community that they become a bit painful for you. I think there's a real opportunity in the online space to turn those people into your de facto community facilitators.
Now, picking up on a point you just mentioned, we see a lot of value in bringing together those content experts, so, you know, the engineers, the planners, you know, those people, together with the community, the context experts. Do you have tips on how to, you know, you mentioned that, you know, you might want to kind of facilitate that further and about those two groups getting together. Do you have any tips around that?
Yeah, my main tip is to be careful. I mean, I don't want to be nasty to the content experts because, you know, some of them are absolutely excellent at engagement. I always think back to my days of face-to-face engagement. I was working for a city in New South Wales, and the sort of chief engineer was a former army sergeant or major. I can't remember which. He might have even been a sergeant major. And he literally paced up and down at the front of the room and told people they were wrong. And it was a terrible meeting. It was embarrassing.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's what we need to avoid at all costs. And there are ways to get people whose first skills aren't citizen engagement to work well. So the question and answer tool is a good example. People ask questions, you can go to that person, get them to write out an answer, pop it on the site. There, you know, you're giving the community direct access to those experts. There are other ways to do it. For instance, you know, video is wonderful. Sharing videos of those people talking about the issue is a really nice way to get their expertise across to the community. And certainly in our forums, you know, you can mark people as experts and they can appear and respond to people. But I would suggest that you know, if you're the engagement person in the organization, you act as a subtle filter on that, and maybe keep the ability to hit the respond button to yourself. Because it is sometimes quite nice to screen out things that could be misconstrued, even if they're well intended.
Yeah, yeah. We have a question that came through Twitter from Jill Conkin. She asked, how do you intentionally open up that conversation with the community for authentic engagement? So how would you kind of lead into some of those more open conversation pieces? How do you enter into that?
Okay, so Jill, tweet again if I'm misunderstanding your question. If you mean about getting started, getting the community used to this, we tend to recommend start your engagement with a number of different projects. So different people are interested in different things. So you start getting people used to what you're doing. I mean, we talked about context setting earlier. So, if you're running a discussion forum, ask the question, but then maybe provide a little bit of context below it so people can understand, what you're going to do with the results. I always think a great introduction to a project is, we're engaging you about this because of this. This is what we're going to do with the results, and this is how we'd like you to contribute, so people can really understand it. But then it's getting your community used to it. So, I mean, there are a lot of people on this call, and everyone works with different types of communities. But if you have a community that has a diverse range of issues, then try and work with people around your organization to find 5 or 6 diverse issues to get started with. And then the community kind of get the feel for this. More of them get involved, more of them get signed up, more of them will tell their friends, and they'll start to understand that this is genuine engagement. And, oh look, we reached the end of the process. They took the time to send us an email saying what they did with the feedback and what the next steps in the process are, so that it becomes quite comfortable. I hope that answers the question, Jill.
Mm-hmm. And we have one more question before we'll move on, and thanks to everybody for sending through these questions. So a question from Adele Panahi. How effective is online engagement tools when it comes to, in this example, First Nations communities, Northern Canada, where there's limited access to internet?
Yeah, look, that's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked it, Adele. We have actually done some work ourselves with the First Nations communities, although I haven't been the sort of client liaison for those processes, so I can't speak for it. But I believe they've worked pretty well. And look, I can talk more easily about broader communities with lower access to the internet. And I think there are a few things that are really important principles in online engagement. The first is using, complying properly with accessibility guidelines. Now that sounds awfully dull, but accessibility guidelines aren't just there for people who have a visual disability. They're also there for people who have, low bandwidth, low literacy, poor technology as well. So if you're following the accessibility guidelines properly, and in Canada those guidelines are typically much better followed than elsewhere in the world, which is wonderful. But I still see sites in Canada that don't comply, and I find that kind of alarming. That's a really important start. The next thing is using the sort of online engagement that works on a mobile device. Now, I shouldn't even be having to say that anymore. That was a drum roll moment 6 years ago, but it's stated to bleeding obvious now. But in communities where people aren't sitting at computers, then access to smartphones does tend to be, fairly high segment of the community. So that can also be valuable. And the next thing I'd say is thinking about other ways to get people involved. I mean, obviously you never do online instead of face-to-face. We've established that. But there are things. I mean, a photo popped up on our company chat feed the other day because somebody had been in a shopping centre and found an iPad with one of our sites on it available to the community to use. So you can use community facilities and things to give people access to those online engagement spaces. But I tend to think in the First Nations communities, although my knowledge of them in Canada is limited, that mobile is going to be a lot of the key to giving people access, because a lot of people have access to smartphones in just about every community these days.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on to moderation.
Cool. Okay, so moderation is really important. Now, I should start by saying I don't want to be alarmist on this. Most people now know how to behave well online. And in our sites, most people choose to behave well. We used to, when we first started 10 years ago, remove about 2% of content. And I'll talk a bit about how we do our moderation, because it provides a bit of an example. Now we're only removing about 1%, which I think is wonderful. What we're learning is that whilst people continue to behave really badly on newspaper chat room sites and things, I think it comes down to people's motivations. They come to our clients' sites to influence policy or influence services and things like that. And so we don't get a lot of people who come there just to troll people. And frankly, they're pretty easy to deal with if they do. We get a lot more of what we remove is people who have entered into the discussion, aren't very happy with the arguments that are being thrown at them, and start being a bit personal in their responses with people, and we remove those quickly. But moderation remains, even though behaviour is getting better, remains really important. For a lot of you, you don't want to go home on a Friday night wondering what on earth is being put on your website. You need some safety there. You need to feel that it's under control. So we, from day one of our business, have had a network of moderators, which has grown over the years. We have moderators now in Canada, the UK, Switzerland, and Australia. And we guarantee every single comment posted to the site is read by a human moderator, and I think that's really important, within 2 hours of posting. Our average is about 20 minutes. Now, it's not just the human moderators. So the first thing we have, because we believe, particularly if you're using those mapping tools, those idea tools that I showed you earlier, or those discussion forums, that your contribution should appear on the site immediately. Now, the reason we think that is in a discussion forum, you're in a discussion. And it's really annoying if you make a really good comment and by the time it appears on the screen, the discussion's moved on. You kind of feel silly. You feel like you're being censored. It's not a good way to engage. And even worse, if you're out in the park with your mobile phone and you're trying to put a pin in the map on the spot you're standing on to say we need a new bench here to sit down, and the pin doesn't appear on the map, you're likely to leave about 15 pins before you give up on it. And so it's really important for some tools that you're able to put content straight on the table, for want of a better word, and see that it's there. And so we have 2 filters on the way in. So anything that's posted gets run through a spam filter to avoid those annoying people who want to sell you Viagra, and also a filter for what we'd call high-risk words. Now, it's not just swear words. We have, I think, about 130 words in our filter. Swear words, versions of swear words with stars in them, words that are risky when used in public discourse. So the word corrupt is in our filter because we know it's not often used well and it's often associated with defamation. So when people trip the filter, they get a nice message telling them they've tripped the filter, but the comment or the input still goes to our moderators who have a look. And sometimes we let it go through. We did some work in Canada recently with the Department of Defense, talking about defense policy. And in the context of our Department of Defense negotiation, the word Nazi was perfectly fine. Normally, it's a high-risk word because of the way it gets used. And so it's really important that the moderators are still there to look it over and say, no, that one was actually okay, and reinstate it to the site. For everything else, they get their content straight onto the site, and our moderators review it. And they're looking for people being aggressive to others, people who are just wildly off topic and kind of a bit insane, people who are trying to promote products, people who are using poor language. There's a whole range of stuff. We clearly display moderation rules on the site, and if you trip the rules, moderators remove the comment. And on the site, if it's a discussion forum anyway on the site, it tells people that the comment was removed and why. And the person who left the content gets an email telling them why their content was removed, and hopefully inviting them to come back and share the content maybe in a slightly different way. We do sometimes see, it's kind of heartbreaking, we'll see a long comment that someone's put a lot of work into that uses some really foul language in maybe the 3rd paragraph, and you're really tempted to just edit it. But we never, ever edit community content. We don't edit it, we don't translate it, we do nothing to modify it, because it's really important. One of the big benefits of online engagement is that full nuance gets across. With face-to-face, when I used to facilitate face-to-face sessions, hopefully some of you are better at this than I was, but you'd listen to someone in the audience sort of do a 5-minute discussion about the poor quality of the roads, and you'd write on your butcher paper on the wall poor roads, and poor roads would be the only element of that 4 or 5 minute diatribe that actually made it on to the analysis of the results. Online actually allows us to take the full comment, which is incredibly valuable. And I think it is really important that we never edit anybody's input, because we just don't know whether they're feeling we're changing the nuance. I'd much rather someone got an email saying, Nat, try again, that wasn't acceptable, than they went to the site and found a comment under their name that had been changed. So I do think that's an important aspect of moderation.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you want to break in there, Lisa?
Very important for the authenticity of the engagement. I have a question to jump in, but it's not related to moderation. So if you have something else you want to share about moderation before we move on.
No, I like the questions better than the stuff I want to say.
All right, and to everybody on the line, do keep sending in your questions, because we are going to push through kind of an empty space that we had allocated for questions, so we're taking them more dynamically on the fly. So a question from Leanne Petrin. So I agree that online engagement is crucial. Am I wrong in assuming it will add cost to your organizations in order to do well? How much should you add to a project budget to engage?
Oh, that's really interesting. Look, it's going to vary. And you know, I mean, for instance, we as an organisation do population-based pricing for local government. We do project pricing for consultants. You know, if you want a general idea of what we do, the bottom end is about $5,000, and it goes up to, you know, 25 or whatever if you're doing something really complex or really long term. But look, what I'd say is that if you get to the point where you know you want to do online engagement and you've got a project that, you know, you want to get started with, there's no harm. You know, I mean, it's worth talking to the, you know, doing a bit of a look at the providers and talking to the people you want to work with. There are often ways to reduce the cost. There are often ways to ameliorate the cost. For instance, you know, when we work with organizations, we sell them unlimited use licenses, which means you can literally engage on hundreds of projects across the year, which can bring your marginal cost of engagement right down. But yes, there's a cost. And you know, it's hard to avoid that. Now, you can reduce the cost by driving efficiency. So you will be engaging much better with your community, hopefully getting better results, hopefully avoiding some of the missteps, and hopefully making the right decision the first time. And there are times when a mix of engagement, online and offline, can reduce cost as well. We have a client in Australia in the Blue Mountains there. If you can picture a community that's a ribbon going across a mountain range, the Blue Mountains is spread right out. And when they used to go to the community for an engagement process, it was, they didn't get much feedback, but also they were running expensive sessions in lots of communities because traveling between them was never particularly easy. And what they did was they mixed the online in with the face-to-face engagement. And I mean, I spoke to them about this ages ago. They might have changed since then. And typically, instead of doing 6 face-to-face events, they'd do 4, and the savings would pay for the online. And their face-to-face events might be, you know, might become less formal or less lengthy because you get to set the context, so they can go straight to the deep diving and all the rest of it. So they found by mixing it up, they could reduce the costs. But I want to be really cautious about that. I said earlier, you know, online engagement should never be done instead of face-to-face. But it can sort of even up the budget as part of a well planned out project.
Yeah, we find people often don't factor in staff hours, you know, when it comes to alternatives. So staff hours for both conducting sessions, writing out post-it notes, analyzing results, all of that can be done more efficiently, as you said, with a platform. But yeah, it's definitely you need to kind of weigh up what's feasible. So let's move to our last one, interpreting the results.
Okay, sure. So look, the final part of managing risk around online engagement is proper result interpretation. So many people, you know, if I could parody a conversation I've had many times, it's, oh, look, we plugged in, you know, this tool to get ideas from the community. We only got 20 ideas, so it was a waste of time and money. And I'll say to them, okay, so how many people came and learned about the project? How do you know there are more than 20 ideas to be had? You know, there's a whole lot of nuance around that that's been completely missed. People are very good at measuring the feedback, and there's this bizarre assumption out there that the more feedback we get, the better. And I'd like to challenge that. And so I think people are not, you know, connecting the dots in terms of interpreting the results. So look, rather than waffle on about it, I want to show you, I'm going to take you straight to the reports from one of our Engagement HQ sites. Now, the data in here is nonsense. This is a demo site. We never give away our clients' results. So, you know, they belong to our clients. I don't have permission to share any of them. So this is a demo site, but you'll get the idea. You can run reports for any cluster of projects, any time period. Everything can be downloaded for your record management and things. But I really want to dwell on this: aware, informed, and engaged. These are our cohorts we measure in. Because you can share information in a multitude of ways, because you can engage in a multitude of ways, we've had to create these cohorts to measure engagement. So you can tell a story about how your engagement has been run. And the value in this, you know, is in this informed cohort in the middle. Aware is broadly unique visitors. You'd all be measuring that on just about anything you used. It's not particularly interesting. Engaged is the number of people who've engaged and given you feedback, and it does always feel good. And certainly if you're at the front end of a project where you're saying to the community, hey, what are your ideas? Put your pins in the map. We want to hear your stories. You are targeting engagement. There's no doubt about that. But this cohort, the informed cohort, is really critical too. A lot of what our clients do is best described by, we've got a draft plan and we want the community's comments on our draft plan. And what we've learned over thousands and thousands of projects is that success in one of those projects does not look like a high engaged cohort. It actually looks like a high informed cohort, because if you put your draft out to the community do not come and give you feedback to say, oh, you've done really well here. What the community will do is sign up and give you comment if they want to change your draft. And so understanding the informed cohort gives you really valuable context. So it might be that people are informed because they viewed a video or they downloaded a document or they've done a whole bunch of things. But you can drill into those informed actions. So I worked on a project a while ago where we had an engaged cohort of 11. It was a planning project. It was about a zoning ordinance. We had an engaged cohort of 11. And we had an informed cohort of 14,000, 8,000 of whom had downloaded the actual planning document. Now, normally, in the way we do engagement traditionally, those 11 people might turn up to the council meeting, and those 11 people might be waving placards and banners saying this is terrible. And the councillors sitting there, who normally don't see anybody apart from the local reporter in their meeting, might be sitting there going, well, okay, we've got a community riot on our hands. But actually, you know, being able to provide context to that and say, you know, 8,000 people downloaded and read the main document and didn't choose to be engaged, that is valuable context. You can't say those 8,000 people who read the document or downloaded the document support what you're doing, but you can say they didn't want to change it enough to bother commenting. And that is so valuable. So if you think back to what I was saying earlier about, you know, people who are worried about being hijacked and, you know, worrying about winning the argument on the site, actually often the only people on a site, if you're doing, say you're doing a discussion forum about a draft plan or strategy, the only people there are the ones who want to change it. And your ultimate protection against those groups kind of dominating the space is that you're actually understanding the data in a bit more of a nuanced form. You don't care if there are 10 people all proclaiming victory because they're the only 10 voices there, because you have the context of understanding the people who haven't turned up. Whereas if you're doing a face-to-face meeting and the 10 people are there, it's really hard to assert that other people are aware but haven't turned up because they're comfortable with this. You know, it might equally be because, you know, there's some hockey on the TV or something like that. But with the online engagement, you can actually see that cohort and understand them. And you'll find that that becomes really valuable. And as you start feeding back to your community and helping them to understand that there's more to this than the comments on the page as well, then they'll start to understand that this isn't about a numbers game. It's not about winning the argument. It's about contributing, expressing, and making sure that you're understood. Now, I should say there's no excuse for ignoring the views of the 11 people. They're 11 members of your community who are passionate about what you're doing, and those views need to be addressed. But the context is your friend and is very valuable.
Mm-hmm. And that just brings us full circle to really understanding that silent majority again. And so we're at time, and I just want to thank you, Matt, for sharing your ideas and really helping us to get a better understanding of authentic engagement, especially when done online. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I'd like to echo Lisa in saying thanks to you, Matt, and also thanks to everybody who's listening today and for your questions and comments. It certainly made this conversation more dynamic and thought-provoking. We'd also like to thank our supporters again, the Maytree Foundation, Ontario Trillium Foundation, J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, and the Province of Ontario for making these conversations possible. So as promised before, in a few days we will email you with links to the audio and other material related to today's call. We also welcome your feedback on these calls, so please do email us at tamarack@tamarackcommunity.ca to let us know how we are doing. We also have a few very exciting upcoming learning events that I'd love to share with you. The first is an event perfect for all those passionate about building strong and resilient neighborhoods. We are hosting our annual Deepening Community event, Neighborhoods, the Heart of Community, Mobilizing for Impact, in the beautiful Montreal this summer from June 6th to 8th, 2017. This is a bilingual national event that will take you on a cultural adventure, inspire your thinking, and re-energize your own community work. Registration is only open for a couple more weeks, so if you are interested in joining us there, the links for both the English and French event websites are on your screen. The other exciting announcement is the recent launch of our 2017 Community Change Institute, Cities of the Future, Co-Creating Tomorrow. This is a 5-day event taking place in Vancouver, BC this September that will bring together over 200 changemakers from across the country and beyond to co-create and learn from one another across the topics of collective impact, community engagement, collaborative leadership, evaluation, and community innovation. This is our biggest event of the year and one you will not want to miss. Finally, if you enjoyed this webinar, we have lots of other exciting ones just around the corner, so we encourage you to visit our website, www.tamarackcommunity.ca, to learn more about them, as well as sign up for our monthly e-magazine, Engage. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.